Welcome to Big Breaking News of America. Genesis Episode 22. Broader cultural and religious impact of the patriarchal narratives. Genesis 12:36. The patriarchal narratives, Genesis 12:36, form a theological and narrative cornerstone of the book of Genesis, chronicling the lives of Abraham, Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, whose covenantal relationship with God lays the groundwork for Israel's identity as a chosen people. These chapters shift from the universal concerns of the primeval history, Genesis 1:11, creation, sin, and humanity's dispersion, to the particular story of a family through which God promises land, Canaan, descendants, a great nation, and blessing, for all nations, Genesis 12:1-3. Organized by the Toledo generations formula, the narratives weave episodic stories of faith, conflict, divine intervention, and human frailty into a cohesive arc that prepares for Israel's emergence in the Torah's later books, Exodus, Deuteronomy. The broader cultural and religious impact of Genesis 12:36 extends far beyond their original context, influencing Jewish tradition, Christian and Islamic theology, and global cultural expressions. Rooted in the Middle Bronze Age, c. 2000–1500 BCE, setting and finalized during the Babylonian exile, 587–539 BCE, the narratives address timeless themes: covenant, faith, providence, human growth, land, and reconciliation, that resonate across centuries. Their impact is evident in Jewish liturgy, education, and ethics, Christian salvation history and Islamic prophetic narratives, and global literature, art, philosophy, and social movements. This exploration examines the narrative's influence in three major areas: Jewish tradition, interfaith theology, and global culture, highlighting specific examples, theological contributions, historical contexts, and contemporary relevance, demonstrating their enduring role as a source of spiritual, ethical, and cultural inspiration. 1. Impact on Jewish tradition. The patriarchal narratives are foundational to Jewish tradition, shaping liturgy, education, ethics, and communal identity. As the opening act of Israel's covenantal story, Genesis 12:36 provides theological and historical roots that unify Jewish communities from the Second Temple period to the modern era. Liturgy and ritual. The narratives are central to Jewish liturgy, with key episodes integrated into synagogue readings, Parshiot, such as Lech Lecha, Genesis 12:117–27, Vayera, Genesis 18:122–24, and Vayishlach, Genesis 32:436–43, recited annually as part of the Torah cycle. These readings reinforce the covenantal bond, with Abraham's call, Genesis 12:1-3, and the Akedah, Genesis 22, evoking divine faithfulness. The Akedah, binding of Isaac, Genesis 22, is a focal point of Rosh Hashanah liturgy, where the shofar invokes Abraham's merit, Zekatavo, and the ram's provision, Genesis 22:13. The prayer "Remember the Covenant of Abraham" draws on Genesis 15 and 17, affirming divine promises during the high holidays. Circumcision, Brit Milah, Genesis 17:10–14, is a core Jewish ritual, directly tied to Abraham's covenant, marking Jewish males as part of the covenantal community. The Avo prayer in the Amidah invokes Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as ancestors, grounding daily worship in their legacy. Jacob's ladder, Genesis 28:10-22, influences the Ma'ariv prayer, with its imagery of angels and divine presence, while his renaming as Israel, Genesis 32:22-32, symbolizes the nation's spiritual striving, celebrated in communal blessings. Education and study. Genesis 12:36 is a cornerstone of Jewish education, studied in Cheder, traditional schools, yeshivot, and shevruta, partnered study. Rabbinic exegesis, such as Bereshit Rabbah and Rashi's commentaries, amplifies the narrative's ethical and theological lessons, encouraging critical engagement. The narrative's human complexity, Abraham's deception, Genesis 12:10-20, Jacob's rivalry, Genesis 27, invites ethical reflection, with Mussar, ethical discipline, literature drawing on the patriarch's growth to teach teshuvah, repentance. For example, Jacob's reconciliation with Esau, Genesis 33, models conflict resolution. The universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, inspires tikkun olam, repairing the world, a principle taught in Jewish schools, linking the patriarch's mission to social justice and global responsibility. Ethics and communal identity. The narratives shape Jewish ethics, with Abraham's chaste, loving kindness, Genesis 18:18, and intercession for Sodom, Genesis 18:22-33, modeling compassion and justice. Hagar's rescue, Genesis 21:17-21, informs Jewish outreach to the marginalized, as seen in organizations like HISE, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. The Covenant, Genesis 12:1-3, 15, 17, and Land Promise, Genesis 12:7, define Jewish identity, with Abraham's purchase of Machpelah, Genesis 23, and Jacob's return to Canaan, Genesis 33, symbolizing attachment to Israel. These themes fuel Zionist movements, from 19th-century pioneers to modern Jewish thought. The patriarch's sojourner status, Genesis 12:10, 23:4, resonates in diaspora communities, fostering resilience and faith, as seen in Jewish survival through exiles and persecutions. Historical context. The narrative's exilic composition, 587-539 BCE, made them a source of hope, with Abraham's migration and Jacob's homecoming mirroring aspirations for return. The Second Temple period, c. 516 BCE 70 CE, saw their integration into synagogue worship, unifying Jews under Hellenistic pressures. Medieval Jewish communities, facing Christian and Islamic dominance, drew on the narrative's covenantal themes to affirm identity, with Rashi and Ramban's commentaries reinforcing communal study. The modern era, marked by emancipation and Zionism, revitalized the narrative's land and universal themes. Cultural significance. The narrative's liturgical role fosters Jewish unity, with Torah readings and rituals like Brit Milah connecting global communities. Educational emphasis on Midrash ensures interpretive vitality, as seen in modern Torah commentaries. Ethical teachings inspire Jewish philanthropy and activism, with the patriarch's chaste informing initiatives like Jewish federations and interfaith partnerships. The narrative's influence on identity shapes Jewish cultural expressions, from Yiddish literature to Israeli art, reinforcing covenantal heritage. 2. Impact on interfaith theology. The patriarchal narratives significantly influence Christian and Islamic theology, positioning Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as shared figures in the Abrahamic faiths. Their themes of covenant, faith, and universal blessing foster interfaith dialogue and theological convergence. Christianity. Theological framework. The narratives are foundational to Christian salvation history, with Abraham as the father of faith, Romans 4:16. Paul interprets Genesis 15:6, "He believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness," as justification by faith, linking Abraham's covenant to Christ's redemptive work, Galatians 3:16. The universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, is fulfilled in Jesus, seen as the seed through whom all nations are blessed. Key episodes. The Akedah, Genesis 22, is a central Christian motif, prefiguring Christ's sacrifice, with Isaac's submission, Genesis 22:9, mirroring Jesus' obedience, Hebrews 11:17-19. Early church fathers like Augustine cited Abraham's faith to contrast Jewish law with Christian grace, though modern theologians emphasize continuity. Jacob's narrative, Jacob's wrestling, Genesis 32:22-32, and renaming as Israel symbolize spiritual transformation, inspiring Christian teachings on renewal, Romans 12:2. His ladder, Genesis 28:10-22, is a metaphor for divine-human connection, influencing Christian mysticism and art. Ethical influence, Abraham's hospitality, Genesis 18:18, and intercession, Genesis 18:22-33, shape Christian ethics of charity and prayer, as seen in monastic traditions and social outreach programs. Historical context. Early Christianity, 1st-4th centuries CE, engaged Jewish exegesis, with the New Testament citing Genesis 12:36 to establish continuity with Israel's covenant. Medieval Christian art and theology, from catacomb frescoes to Aquinas, drew on the narratives, while Reformation thinkers like Luther emphasized Abraham's faith. Cultural significance. The narratives influence Christian liturgy, for example, Advent readings, hymnody, for example, O God of Bethel, and art, for example, Caravaggio's Sacrifice of Isaac. They inform modern Christian Zionism and interfaith dialogue, with initiatives like the Parliament of the World's Religions citing Genesis 12:3. Islam. Theological framework. The Quran honors Ibrahim as a prophet and Hanif, monotheist, with Genesis 12:36's covenant, Genesis 12:1-17, reflected in Surah Al-Baqarah 2:124-129, where Ibrahim and Ismail build the Kaaba. The universal blessing aligns with Islam's global mission, seen in Ibrahim's legacy as the father of nations, Surah Ibrahim 14:35-41. Key episodes. The Akedah, Genesis 22, appears in Surah as-Safat 37:99-113, with Islamic tradition identifying the son as Ismail, celebrated in Eid al-Adha. Hagar and Ishmael's story, Genesis 16:21, is central to Hajj, with Hagar's search for water, Genesis 21:14-19, mirrored in the Sa'i ritual between Safa and Marwa. Jacob's narrative, Yaqub, Jacob, is a prophet in Surah Yusuf 12:46, with his trials, Genesis 27:33, reflecting perseverance and divine guidance. His renaming as Israel is acknowledged, linking to the Bani Israel, children of Israel. Ethical influence. Ibrahim's faith and hospitality inspire Islamic ethics of sadaqah, charity, and dawah, invitation to faith, while Higa's resilience informs Muslim feminist theology, emphasizing marginalized voices. Historical context. Early Islam, 7th century CE, engaged Jewish and Christian traditions, with Quranic exegesis drawing on midrashic stories of Abraham's rejection of idolatry. Medieval Islamic scholars like Al-Tabari incorporated Genesis 12:36's themes, fostering Abrahamic dialogue. Cultural significance. The narratives shape Islamic rituals, Hajj, Eid al-Adha, art, for example, Kaaba calligraphy, and literature, for example, Rumi's poetry. They inform modern interfaith initiatives, like the Abrahamic Family House in Abu Dhabi, citing Genesis 12:3 for peace. Interfaith dialogue. The shared reverence for Abraham fosters interfaith dialogue, with Genesis 12:36's universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, inspiring initiatives like A Common Word, 2007, which promotes Jewish-Christian-Muslim cooperation. The Abrahamic faith's focus on covenant and ethics bridges theological divides, addressing issues like peace and social justice. The narrative's inclusion of Hagar and Ishmael supports dialogue with Islam, with Jewish and Christian scholars engaging Islamic perspectives to highlight shared heritage. Conferences like the Abrahamic Religions Symposium draw on Genesis 12:36 to explore common ground. The Akeda's varying interpretations, Isaac in Judaism and Christianity, Ismail in Islam, encourage respectful exchange, with interfaith forums using the narrative to discuss sacrifice and faith. Cultural significance. The narrative's interfaith impact shapes religious education, with seminaries teaching Genesis 12:36 alongside New Testament and Quranic texts to foster understanding. They inspire interfaith art, from medieval manuscripts to modern installations, and literature, like Khalil Gibran's works, blending Abrahamic themes. The narrative's ethical legacy informs global interfaith movements, with organizations like Religions for Peace citing Genesis 12:3 to address poverty, conflict, and environmental crises. 3. Impact on global culture. The patriarchal narratives have profoundly influenced global culture, shaping literature, art, philosophy, and social movements. Their themes of faith, struggle, and universal hope transcend religious boundaries, resonating in secular and pluralistic contexts. Literature. The narrative's vivid storytelling, Abraham's migration, Genesis 12:9, the Akedah, Genesis 22, Jacob's wrestling, Genesis 32:22-32, inspires literary works across genres. Medieval Jewish texts, like Sfer HaYashar, expand the narratives, influencing Yiddish and Hebrew literature, such as Sholem Aleichem stories. Christian literature, from Dante's Divine Comedy, 14th century, which alludes to Abraham's faith, to John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, 17th century, draws on the narrative's journey motif. Modern novels, like Anita Diamant's The Red Tent, 1997, reimagine the patriarch's family, emphasizing women's perspectives. Islamic literature, including Rumi's Masnavi, 13th century, reflects Ibrahim's trials, while contemporary works like Layla Aboulella's novels explore Higa's legacy in Muslim identity. Secular literature engages the narrative's universal themes, with Herman Melville's Moby Dick, 1851, citing the Aqidah for existential struggle, and Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, 1977, echoing Jacob's transformation in African American narratives. Art and visual culture. The narratives inspire religious and secular art, from ancient synagogue mosaics, for example, Dura Europos, 3rd century CE, depicting the Aqidah, to medieval Christian frescoes, for example, Giotto's Sacrifice of Isaac. Renaissance artists like Caravaggio and Rembrandt painted Abraham's trials, emphasizing human emotion and divine mystery. Jewish art, from Marc Chagall's biblical paintings to modern Israeli works, portrays Jacob's ladder and the patriarch's journeys, symbolizing faith and homeland. Islamic calligraphy and miniatures, especially in Persian traditions, depict Ibrahim and Ismail, adorning mosques and manuscripts. Secular art engages the narrative's drama, with 20th-century artists like Picasso referencing Abraham's sacrifice in anti-war works, and contemporary installations exploring themes of migration and identity, inspired by Genesis 12:1-3. Film and media adapt the narratives, from biblical epics like The Ten Commandments, 1956, which includes Abraham's legacy, to modern films like The Prince of Egypt, 1998, reflecting covenantal themes. Documentaries on biblical archaeology highlight sites like Hebron, tied to Genesis 23. Philosophy and ethics. The Aqidah, Genesis 22, is a philosophical touchstone, with Søren Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling, 1843, exploring Abraham's faith as an existential leap influencing existentialism and ethics. Immanuel Levinas, a Jewish philosopher, cites Abraham's hospitality, Genesis 18:1-8, to develop an ethic of responsibility for the other. The narrative's emphasis on chaste and justice, Genesis 18:22-33, informs human rights frameworks, with Jewish, Christian, and Muslim thinkers drawing on Genesis 12:3 to advocate for universal dignity, as seen in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. Secular ethics, inspired by the narrative's human frailty and growth, for example, Jacob's transformation, Genesis 32:33, shape leadership and conflict resolution theories, with management literature citing Abraham's diplomacy, Genesis 21:22-34. Social movements and modern issues. Zionism and Jewish identity, the land promise, Genesis 12:7, and Abraham's purchase of Machpelah, Genesis 23, fuel Zionist movements, from Theodore Herzl's vision to modern Israeli identity. The narrative's Sojourner theme, Genesis 12:10, resonates in diaspora advocacy, with Jewish organizations citing Genesis 12:36 for cultural preservation. Social justice, Hagar's story, Genesis 16:21, inspires feminist and liberation theology, with Jewish and Christian groups advocating for refugees and marginalized communities. Muslim activists draw on Hagar's resilience for women's rights, as seen in organizations like Sisters in Islam. Environmental stewardship, the covenant's universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, informs Jewish environmental ethics. Baal Tashkit, with groups like Hazan linking the Patriarch's land stewardship to sustainability. Interfaith initiatives, like Green Faith, cite Genesis 12:36 for ecological responsibility. Migration and multiculturalism, the Patriarch's migrations, Genesis 12:19, 28 hours 10 minutes, resonate in modern discussions of displacement, with NGOs like the International Rescue Committee using Abraham's sojourner status to advocate for refugees. The narrative's inclusivity, for example, Higa, Melchizedek, supports multicultural policies in pluralistic societies. Historical context. The narrative's exilic composition made them a source of resilience, influencing Jewish cultural survival through Hellenistic, Roman, and medieval periods. The Renaissance and Enlightenment saw their integration into Western literature and philosophy, while colonial and post-colonial contexts spread their influence globally. The 20th century, marked by the Holocaust, Zionism, and globalization, revitalized the narrative's themes, with Jewish thinkers like Martin Buber and secular authors like Franz Kafka engaging their existential and ethical dimensions. Cultural significance. The narrative's literary and artistic legacy enriches global culture, with their archetypal stories of faith and struggle inspiring works from Shakespeare to modern cinema, fostering cross-cultural dialogue. Their philosophical and ethical impact shapes moral discourse, with the Akedah and universal blessing informing debates on sacrifice, justice, and human rights. Social movements draw on the narrative's themes to address contemporary challenges, from migration to environmental crises, ensuring their relevance in a globalized world. For contemporary relevance, the patriarchal narratives remain profoundly relevant in the 21st century, addressing modern religious, cultural, and social issues through their timeless themes. Religious renewal and spirituality. In Judaism, the narratives inspire spiritual renewal, with Hasidic and Jewish renewal movements drawing on the Zohar's mystical readings of Genesis 12:36 for meditation and prayer. The Patriarch's faith, Genesis 15:6, informs personal and communal emunah, as seen in online Torah study platforms like Spheria. Christianity integrates the narratives into spiritual formation, with Abraham's journey and the Akedah shaping retreats and sermons, particularly in evangelical and Catholic contexts. Ecumenical movements cite Genesis 12:3 for unity, as seen in the World Council of Churches. Islam emphasizes Ibrahim's trials in spiritual practices, with Hajj and Eid al-Adha reinforcing community and devotion. Sufi traditions draw on Yaqub's perseverance, Genesis 32:33, for mystical reflection, influencing modern Islamic spirituality. Interfaith and intercultural dialogue. The narrative's shared Abrahamic heritage fosters interfaith dialogue, with initiatives like the Abrahamic Business Circle citing Genesis 12:3 to promote economic and social cooperation. Academic conferences, such as those at the Wolf Institute, explore Genesis 12:36's role in Jewish-Christian-Muslim relations. Intercultural projects, like the Abraham Path Initiative, retrace Abraham's migrations, Genesis 12:19, to promote tourism and dialogue in the Middle East, bridging cultural divides. The inclusion of Hijra and Ishmael supports feminist and interfaith advocacy, with Muslim-Jewish dialogues emphasizing their shared narrative to address gender and minority rights. Social and ethical challenges. Migration and refugees. The Patriarch's sojourner status inspires advocacy for migrants, with faith-based NGOs like Jesuit Refugee Service citing Genesis 12:10 to support displaced populations. Secular policies, like Canada's refugee resettlement programs, echo the narrative's hospitality ethic. Environmental ethics. The covenant's link to land, Genesis 12:7, informs environmental movements, with Jewish groups like the Coalition on the Environment and Jewish Life, Patriarchal, and interfaith initiatives like Laudato Si drawing on the narratives for sustainable practices. Social justice and equity. Hijra's marginalization, Genesis 21, and Abraham's justice, Genesis 18:22-33, inspire movements for racial and gender equity, with Black Lives Matter and Me Too citing biblical inclusivity. Jewish Tzedakah organizations, like American Jewish World Service, apply Genesis 12:36's ethics globally. Cultural preservation and innovation. Digital platforms preserve the narrative's legacy, with apps like My Jewish Learning offering midrashic insights and interfaith perspectives. Virtual reality tours of biblical sites like Hebron, Genesis 23, enhance cultural engagement. Contemporary art and literature reinterpret the narratives, with works like Colm Twain's The Testament of Mary, 2012, exploring maternal perspectives, and graphic novels depicting Jacob's wrestling for younger audiences. Educational curricula, from religious schools to secular universities, integrate Genesis 12:36 into studies of literature, history, and ethics, ensuring their cultural transmission. Cultural significance. The narrative's contemporary relevance bridges religious and secular worlds, with their themes informing policy, education, and activism, from UN refugee frameworks to climate accords. Their adaptability ensures ongoing cultural innovation, with new media, podcasts, films, retelling Abraham's story for diverse audiences, fostering global resonance. 5. Synthesis, a timeless cultural and religious legacy. The broader cultural and religious impact of Genesis 12:36 reflects their role as a timeless source of spiritual, ethical, and cultural inspiration. In Jewish tradition, the narratives shape liturgy, Brit Milah, Rosh Hashanah, education, Shevruta, Mussar, and identity, covenant, Zionism, unifying communities across history. In interfaith theology, they ground Christian salvation history, Abraham's faith, Akedah, and Islamic prophetic narratives, Ibrahim, Hijra, fostering dialogue through shared Abrahamic heritage. In global culture, they inspire literature, Dante to Diamant, art, Chagall to Picasso, philosophy, Kierkegaard to Levinas, and social movements, Zionism to environmentalism, addressing universal themes of faith, struggle, and hope. Rooted in the Middle Bronze Age and exilic contexts, the narrative's adaptability ensures their relevance, from ancient synagogues to modern digital platforms. Their influence spans religious practices, ethical frameworks, and cultural expressions, preparing for the Torah's redemptive arc and offering wisdom for contemporary challenges like migration, equity, and sustainability. Genesis 12:36 stands as a cultural and religious bridge, connecting ancient promises to modern aspirations for justice, community, and global blessing. Archaeological and textual contributions. Archaeological sites like Hebron, Genesis 23, and Shechem, Genesis 12:6, enhance cultural tourism, with excavations informing public understanding of the narrative's historical roots. Textual studies, comparing Genesis 12:36 to ancient Near Eastern texts, enrich academic and popular engagement, as seen in museum exhibits and documentaries. Cultural and religious impact. The narratives unify Jewish identity, shape Christian and Islamic theology, and inspire global cultural narratives, from sacred rituals to secular ethics. Their interfaith legacy fosters cooperation, addressing global issues through shared values, as seen in Abrahamic dialogue initiatives. Contemporary relevance. The narratives inform responses to modern challenges, from refugee advocacy to environmental ethics, offering a moral compass for pluralistic societies. Their cultural vitality ensures ongoing reinterpretation, with new art, literature, and media preserving their legacy for future generations. 6. Conclusion: a universal and enduring influence. The patriarchal narrative's broader cultural and religious impact underscores their role as a universal and enduring text, shaping Jewish tradition, interfaith theology, and global culture. Their integration into Jewish liturgy, education, and ethics fosters communal identity and moral growth, while their influence on Christian and Islamic theology bridges Abrahamic faiths, promoting dialogue and shared values. In global culture, the narrative's archetypal stories and ethical insights inspire literature, art, philosophy, and social movements, addressing timeless and contemporary issues. From ancient exilic hopes to modern interfaith initiatives, Genesis 12:36 offers a vision of covenantal faith, human resilience, and universal blessing, resonating across religious and secular spheres. As a foundation for the Torah's narrative, they affirm divine-human partnership, preparing for Israel's redemptive journey and inviting all to share in their transformative legacy. Thank you for watching Big Breaking News of America. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for more news updates. Share our channel with your friends and family members, leave a like for more videos and express your thoughts under comment section.